I would define, in brief, the poetry of words as the rhythmical creation of beauty. Greetings, Poe fans. Welcome back to another episode of the 6 Degrees of Poe. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I'm Jeannie Smith, and we
We
are
are the
the Potastic
Poetastic
Two.
Two.
Yay!
Yay! So, this evening, we are going to go back to our degree of literature, which we have already done one episode this season on satire. However, since it's National Poetry Month for April, we decided that it would be great to talk about some specific poetry, which we decided on ballads.
Yes, and most people don't really equate ballads with poetry, but it's just a longer version.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jeannie, define what is a ballad?
A ballad, according to the Poetry Foundation, is a popular narrative song that's been passed down orally in a tradition of telling the past and what has been going on. And it's just traditional, recounting tragedy, comedy, heroics, things like that.
Yeah, and thinking about like that the hero aspect of it, there's not always a hero, but many times there is a hero within the ballad.
Right. And according to the Library of Congress, there were the epic poems like, Gilgamesh
Beowulf,
and Beowulf and Iliad and the
Iliad.
Odyssey and those kinds of things that they said were, in essence, the original type of ballad, but because they were epic, meaning so long, that it
Right.
was very hard for people to recite them correctly and in entirety. So that's where the ballad kind of came into existence because it became a shorter version. And remember, written word did not come into existence until like the poem of Gilgamesh as being one
Hmm.
of the first in the Sumerian times, because that's when they started writing language down on clay tablets.
Right, exactly.
So that's why, and then unfortunately, over the years, the literate level of most people as we grew in population was kind of small, because it was only meant for the upper class, the nobility, and those
Right.
people that had the education. So those that were considered peasants or slaves or anything like that, they did not have the opportunity to learn how to read and write. And so they had to figure out a way to pass along their history. And they did that
Exactly.
through telling stories. And most of the time they would put it to music and lyrical time because we all know repetition is easier for a human to remember. Not just humans, you can even see it in the animal kingdom with certain animals. They learn by repetition.
Oh, absolutely. And I always joke, and I think a lot of people do. I can remember a song that I learned when I was 5 years old, word for word, verbatim, however you want to say it, better than I can remember something I read 2 days ago. It's
Exactly.
just fascinating, and it's because of that lyrical, that musical
That
repetition.
rhythm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that rhythm. And I mean, and most people don't understand that muscle memory also is
Yes.
is a
Yes.
repetition memory. When we
Absolutely.
practice and practice and practice something over and over again, like if you play sports or something, your body starts building these muscle memories.
Mhm.
Uh, so, it's kind of ironic, I guess, if you think about it, that the oldest types of languages weren't written, but they were spoken. And they
Yeah.
were spoken in chants and some types of rhythm. So poetry, in my opinion, poetry's been around a lot longer than anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, you could even kind of even go back biblical because
Mm-hmm.
of, Song of Solomon, Psalms, Proverbs,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the poetry that's within the lines of the Bible as well.
Yeah, and I'm just not going to hit too much upon that because you brought up the Greeks and stuff.
Right.
But
Yeah.
in my time talks for this month, because it is because it is natural National Poetry Month,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be discussing a lot of that, especially when it comes to the actual word poetry. So
Oh,
I don't want
cool.
to delve into that too much right now.
Oh,
So
yeah. No, no, we want to save that because your time talks are awesome, and let's keep that as a surprise.
yay! So let's get back to those ballads and let's talk
Yes,
about,
yes. And
you
so
know, that
let's
type.
yeah, and let's kind of talk about the stylings, the meter, the all of the what's the word I'm looking for? Technical aspects of a ballad.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so normally they're written in like a quatrain, and the rhyme scheme is usually it's every other line or the second and fourth line, I should say, rhyme. So it's like an A B C B type of
Hmm.
rhyme scheme.
Yes, and that's just the typical of a verse with a quatrain.
Yeah.
And sometimes a ballad actually ends with like a couplet. It
Yes.
it
Yes, it can.
it's a quatrain of 4/4 with the A B and then
C
C
B.
B,
Yeah.
but then it ends with a couplet at the last two lines, kind of hitting home what it's the I guess we could say the moral of the story, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really and truly it is because there are some messages and some morals, just like fables and things like that, that you get within a ballad, something you can take away of a learning experience from it. Because it is a
Yeah,
story. It is a
yeah, it
story.
is. I mean, if you think back to, we won't go all the way back. We're going to come a little bit further in history around about the 1700s and talk about how you had the bards, the
Hmm.
traveling people that would, write down heroic aspects or tragedies or comedies. And even the jesters in the royal courts could
Oh
be
yeah, and the
considered.
the the troubadours, the
Yeah, it's
traveling
exactly all
troubadours.
that. And
Hmm.
so then you get in because that's mostly European because they're all talking about things that's the tragedies or the comedies because Chaucer comes to mind.
Yes.
He wasn't major a ballad because he was known for his epics.
Yeah, and
So
that's even before the Renaissance, more
mhm.
Middle Ages, definitely.
Yeah, because you got the Black Death, so it was like, doop.
Mhm.
But then if you hop over from Europe into America,
Mhm.
then you start seeing some big changes because America was kind of conquered or consolidated by the British mostly.
Yeah, oh,
So,
and I was going to say one thing I want to add before we move to America in the
mhm,
18th century is during the Renaissance times when you had these traveling musicians and things. um, the first place that really ballads came up in written form was in broadsides, which were like little kind of pamphlets that were sold out on the street and things like that. And that's where you really kind of started seeing them written down more than before any time before that.
yeah, I mean the broadsides. You know, it's like the written word was passing around, but once more, you had the same problem. It was only getting to a certain amount of literate
Right.
people,
Yeah,
so that's why the oral tradition still came into play because
exactly.
you still had the balladeers that were singing the songs while you had the broadsides that were written, writing
Mhm.
the epics down, not the epics, but the ballads down.
Yeah, and what one kind of funny thing I'm going to mention is most every time I see like an old movie or even some of the more modern movies where they do have like the court of Henry VIII or, the king and queen, the ladies in waiting, the knights and things like that, there's always some kind of troubadour group coming in and they're always singing these ballads and it sounds very whimsical sometimes.
Yeah.
Have you said I know you know what I'm talking about, and it's just
Mhm.
it's almost the same style in every single movie, and it's very interesting to think of it that way.
Well, and that throws me back to, Renaissance fairs are big, especially
Yes.
in America. And way back, and it seems like another lifetime for me, when I was doing my professional storytelling and all that in East Tennessee,
Mhm.
we actually did a Renaissance fair where our storytelling group became like balladeers.
Oh,
So,
cool. Okay.
and I was a wench. I was playing a wench, because we were having little bar scenes, and so we would come in and we would sing these ballads to, that, they were the raunchy type ballads, those types of things, not the heroic type, but the comedic. We would do
Yes.
the comedic ballads and talk about the drunkards and all that kind of stuff. But
Probably
when you
on a fine line between ballad and limerick.
Exactly, exactly. But it was written as a ballad, but
Right.
it wasn't quite there. But yes, and so Renaissance, when you're talking about Renaissance fairs and the Renaissance ages, that's what I think of is like the traveling group of telling either raunchy tales or because you can't tell me that they didn't have the raunchy times. It was
Oh,
the
yeah.
that kind of thing. So, but they started progressing into a more, I guess I want to say, civilized area when you started getting
Yeah.
into like the 1700s and then the 1800s, because a lot of the writers of these ballads started changing them more towards a historical storytelling
Yes.
type,
I
you know.
agree, and we really found out in our research that poets.org had a lot of really good information, but in the late 18th century, some of the very famous ones were coming out. One of the ones that we were looking up, like Robert Burns in 1794 with "My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose," and again, he's
Mhm.
in Scotland, and he is
Mhm.
kind of the premier Scottish poet. And that one, I know most, or I wouldn't say most, I would say many people have heard that poem. My love is like a red, red rose,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful ballad.
Yeah, and the one thing is that maybe most people would remember that particular line, but
Hmm.
not know what it goes to.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, a lot of uh, artists in the music industry have used some types of poetry lines in their songs to, kind of give homage to those writers. And those, like, "My love is like a red, red rose," is very, memorable because it's got
Oh,
that alliteration type thing or that repetition.
it does. I mean, and and we're going to talk about more modern ballads in later on in this episode. But I will say what comes to mind when you bring that up is the before this Shakespeare with what's in a name that we call Rose. I'm not sure if I'm
Mhm.
quoting that perfectly or not, but
The
and
rose is
then
what is the rose but any other name is
would smell
doesn't
as
smell as
sweet.
sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. And then modern, Every Rose Has Its Thorns is another
Oh
ballad
yeah.
by Poison. But yeah, but just the first little stanza of Robert Burns' poem, A Red, Red Rose. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. And I think many people probably have heard that, at least that part of that poem.
Yes, and that actually triggers the song by Conway Twitty. called Rose. Bette Midler did it too,
Oh
but it was
yeah, yeah, yeah,
originally
yeah.
like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
like a Rose Springs, and Springs, and I can't remember it right now, but
Yeah. No, I know
definitely
exactly.
love
Yeah,
that
it's
song.
beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yep, it's called The Rose, and I
Mm-hmm.
love Conway. To me, he was like most artists in the country genre and
Mm-hmm.
the folklore,
Yeah.
not folklore, folk song,
Yeah, I know
because
what
I
you
know
meant.
folk songs, you know, became big, but you know, I'll digress. Yeah, some say love it's like a river that drowns the tender reed, that kind of thing. So yeah, it
Yes,
fits with that
it
description that
does.
you just said.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so sticking with the timeline, I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Yeah. So, and then two others that we were talking about, and this one probably really kick-started even more than the Robert Burns poem, but really kick-started the whole ballad movement of how it has evolved into what it is today, and that is in 1798, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And
Oh yeah.
that's just it's so good.
And what's so unusual, well, not really, I guess not unusual, is that we have paraphrased or used some of the the couplet of it. Like I use it, like I use like peak sky in the morn, sailors be warned, peak sky at night, sailors delight.
Yeah,
And that's a that's a paraphrase from the rhyme of the ancient mariner, and
yeah,
I've always remembered that. And it's been used in quite a few things, like especially movies and stuff. But it's
yeah.
just funny how some things from certain things will stick with you more than other things. But
I
yeah,
I
Coolidge.
agree. And part of the first quatrain stanza, however you want to say it, of the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, it is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three by thy long gray beard and glittering eye. Now wherefore stoppest thou me?
Nope.
It's so smooth. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean it, and you can also say that when you think of a ballad today, you think of a ballad being put to music.
Yes.
That's what it is, and these are people who were the first type of musicians before like rock bands and like Poison and Every Rose Has Its Thorn and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
They were the originals that had their little fifes or uh, sitars and all
Yes.
the different musical instruments,
Mhm.
pianos and stuff. So
Absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because, the ballads started out being songs that were sung and not written to a poetical lyrical form, written
mhm.
down but not sung, into then what we have nowadays, written down and sung. It's
Yeah.
very interesting how it's evolved.
Yeah, and it goes to show that the literacy had a I mean, it had to have a lot to do with it,
I
because
totally agree.
not just in literacy of language, but literacy in music. Those that
Yes.
learned how to read music and write it, write music, because that's a whole different genre right
Yeah,
there.
whole different
So,
language. A whole different language when you
exactly.
think about it. Yeah.
So, by learning it, like by writing it to music and putting the verse with it, you're crossing two language barriers
Mhm.
into one, and now it's like a whole nother genre in itself.
Yeah. And then another author who kind of, I think, the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner kind of, I think, spurred him, because it was the same year later that year that William Wordsworth published his poetry collection, Lyrical Ballads, and um,
Yeah, they were co-authors on that.
Yeah.
right? No,
Or no, I
Coolidge,
don't
not
think
Coolidge. It was Wordsworth, and oh, it was another Sam Worthington. No,
okay.
was it Worthington?
I
Yeah,
can't remember. I cannot remember.
yeah. He was not a balladeer.
Mhm.
He was like a critic. So
Yeah.
he and Wordsworth put together lyrical ballads, or isn't that what it's called?
Yeah,
Lyrical
it's called
ballads.
Lyrical Ballads, the collection. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, the collection. So they themselves didn't write anything. I think they just put them together and published it.
Yeah. And so before we make a connection, Jeannie, what I think you were going to also mention some other things about the American side, which is kind of tying in nicely to what we're about to talk about.
Oh yeah, well, with after the American Revolution and all that, when a lot of the European and we had a lot of the Dutch and the French and the English and the Irish and the Germans and them bringing their own uh, myths and legends and traditions over here
Mm-hmm.
to the United States after the American Revolution, the ballads kind of shifted a little bit. It went away from the way it was written and the way it was recorded because it got out of the English, like the old English. We'll call it old English.
Yeah.
It kind of started going into more of the American slang
Yeah.
because they were
Okay.
shortened and everything, but they still kept on the same side of
Right.
telling about heroics and comedy and tragedy and those types of things coming into place because, I mean, if you think about it, the history of it, you have the American Revolution. I mean, it was barely won by
Mm-hmm.
the colonists.
Very
And then
true.
a lot of things because we went into war again in 1812, which I bring that up because if you jump in, that there is a very famous, I'm going to say famous, story or ballad written by Johnny Horton called The Battle of New Orleans, which takes
Yes.
place at the very last battle of the War of 1812. So even though it was written over 100 years later, it was talking about that time period and kind of passing on the tradition of that history. So,
Right. And I can still remember singing, to be able to sing part of that, in
mhm,
1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel
along
Jackson
with
down
Colonel
the mighty
Jackson down the
Mississippi.
mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans and we
The
shot the
British,
bloody British in
yes,
a town in
town
New
in New
Orleans.
Orleans.
Well, me teaching eighth grade history and American history in that battle, I used that quite well because
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
there's really cool. Somebody did a whole scene to that song using Legos.
Oh, very
It was
cool.
awesome.
Very cool.
So
Very
I mean,
cool.
talk about getting the history in there, but having the kids remember it because they loved it. They loved watching those little Legos, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
had a Lego alligator and everything. So
And
so
Legos make connections, and
uh-huh.
so does that ballad with history. Sorry,
Yeah.
I had to go
So
a little, silly there.
tying, yeah, tying it in. So yeah, but
Yeah.
if you think about it, this was the early 1800s, and Poe had already been born before the Battle of New Orleans, and
Hmm.
kind of
He
as
would have
he
been
grew
5.
older.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think he'd be writing at 5, but you never know. He might
You
have
never
written some when
know.
he was 5.
Yeah. And so, and speaking of Poe,
Mhm.
I'm sure everybody is wondering, okay, how does Poe fit into ballads? Well, Poe did write a few ballads within his poetry, and that's one of the reasons we decided to choose this topic tonight.
Yeah, and because one of the most famous and I know everybody's mind is automatically going to one, but they're going to probably not realize it's not the right one. We're going to talk
Right.
about that in a minute, but
Yeah.
the one because it fits so well with the definition of a ballad because it talks about a tragedy is good old Annabel Lee.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it is how many of us, and we've talked about this either on Poe Unplugged or on our episodes, right? That we've
Hmm.
all talked about how in early middle school or mid middle school, like from sixth to eighth grade, we all had to, in class, learn Annabelle Lee and
Yep.
recite it for the class. Well, maybe not all, but, majority.
Yeah.
That was the main poem. And okay, it was kind of easy for us to remember because it fit that lyric. It fit that balladeer form. And most people, Stevie Nicks, I think it wasn't Stevie Nicks
Yes,
the one that recorded it?
she
Annabelle
did.
Lee.
And it's beautiful the way she arranged the music for it, and
Mhm,
it makes the ballad he wrote come to life. And I have it pulled up. I kind of have most of it memorized, but I always like to
mhm,
make sure I'm not missing anything. But just that first stanza, it was
mhm,
many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. And it's
mhm.
just so beautiful, and it goes on to tell the story of a tragedy, and it just fits the ballad narrative so well.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't exactly hit the ABCB
Right.
quatrain,
Right.
but it does have some of the similarities to it. So
Yeah, it
not
does.
everything has to be exact in the definition for it to be a ballad. And
That's
like
right.
we've
And
talked about,
that's yeah, and that's why
they've changed.
poetry is so expressive of yourself and in the moment that you're writing it. And
Hmm.
Poe did use a lot of technicality in his writing. He was a very strong technical writer, but he did veer off and created some things within the framework of different styles.
Yeah. And that's okay because
Yeah,
that's what a poet does. I mean, poetry has changed, especially with the literary connection that so many different things have come into play, not just with how people write them, but the culture themselves and their
right.
influence
Yes.
on poetry. So Annabelle Lee is definitely one of the most memorable, in my opinion, of his ballads.
Oh,
So, and then another one that has
absolutely.
been, yeah, the other one that has been actually mentioned as being a ballad,
Yeah.
but Carmen and I were discussing this. We were like, I don't think quite fits either the tragic or the comic or the heroic. But you can make your own decision. But that would be the Raven.
Well,
You know,
it fits more of the tragic, but it it borderlines on could it be a ballad or not. And much of the research
yeah,
I looked at, it was leaning towards the not category.
yeah. I mean, he definitely is suffering, or the narrator, shall I say, the narrator is suffering from a tragedy, but
Mhm.
the poem itself is not talking strictly about a tragedy like with Annabelle Lee.
Mhm.
If you compare the two side by side, in when he's written Annabelle Lee, he's talked about how in a kingdom by the sea lays, Annabelle Lee and everything. But the Raven, it's talking about being visited and having grief. So it's more along the lines of
Yeah.
the grief of the tragedy. So it's like after the fact. So that's why I don't think it quite fits the ballot
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And while The Raven is one of our favorites, um
Mhm.
it doesn't have to fit every category that we talk about.
Yeah.
So,
No, because that's the wonderful world of poetry.
yes.
Poetry can fit in so many different genres. I mean,
Yeah.
you can write it about comedy, you can write it because we talked about satire with Poe.
Mhm.
The horror, the horror would be fit into the tragedy. And then
Yeah.
even the comedy, like some of his can't really think of one right now. Conqueror? No. Trying to think one of his poems that is strictly more like of a comedic. And just
Um,
to know that the definition of comedy from the Greeks means it has a happy ending. So I'm trying to think of anything of Poe that has a happy ending.
Well, the remember for his birthday, we read The Happiest Day. And
Yeah,
so
sure.
that may be one of the few that does of
Yeah,
his poems. Yeah.
maybe. So that works
There's
too.
some other
So,
ones. There's some other ones as well. But
but
a
yeah,
lot of them have grief and tragedy built in
and
and some
even
horror.
heroics, and even
Yeah.
some heroics. Um, Not maybe like we think of when we think of Gilgamesh and Iliad and Odyssey and all those, but more along the
Mhm.
lines of survival, just survival.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so he Poe does have a few more that we're going to talk about. Ulalume was also written as a
Mm-hmm.
ballad, and I'm going to read the first stanza, and it does definitely not follow the
Quatrain.
A B C B and quatrain because it has one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine lines in the first stanza, and so I'm just going to read that first stanza. The skies they were ashen and sober, the leaves they were crisped and sere, the leaves they were withering and sere. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber, in the misty mid region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber, in the ghoul haunted woodland of Weir. So it's more A B A let's see,
I
B
mean, he has a
A B.
rhythmic in
Yeah.
there. He's got
Yeah,
he's
it
got the
definitely
rhymes in there.
yeah, it does. It's more of an A B mixing up a little bit, some A B B A and that kind of thing. Which, again, Poe infused a lot of different elements in his poems, but it is called Ulalume a ballad. I mean, and it really is a ballad telling the story of the lonesome night in October. And
Yeah.
he even adds some of the Greek allusions of Psyche and, you know, um,
Yeah, it definitely tells a story. It's got like a
Diane.
folklore. It's got a folklore tie to it, like
Yes.
legends and myths and stuff like that. So
Mhm. Oh, yeah, The
it
Door of a
definitely fits
Legended
into a
Tomb.
ballad. Hmm.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. It's one of my favorites, definitely.
Yes. And then of course the last poem, or the one that actually is named the ballad, just ballad, period,
Yeah.
no the or anything, is talking about, and like I was discussing with Carmen, one of the interesting things, it's like one of the only where the narrator is a female,
Mhm.
and it talks about wedding and about that whole aspect of marriage, and how you're supposed to act when you're married, and those types of things. I don't want to give a whole thing away
Right.
about
Right.
the ballad,
Yeah,
but
it's also called Bridal Ballad.
yeah, bridal ballad, because it does talk about the, and I will read the first verse, but I'm going to save the last for the end. So
Yes.
the first verse is: the ring is on my hand, and the wreath is on my brow. Satins and jewels grand, and many a rood of land are all at my command, and I am happy now. So I think rather interesting also is that he's written something that's joyous at the beginning, because
Absolutely. Yeah, and
not only is it a female narrator, but it's like happy.
yeah, and what I also like too is, thinking about this is about a woman and her feelings about being wedded and the happiness that it brings. And so that's really a neat theme to go with.
Yes, and it fits with Poe's tradition of going happy and having different things to end in sadness,
Yeah.
maybe. So So if you haven't read it, that'd be something interesting for people to go and read, and especially if, I hate to say it, but if you're thinking of marriage, it,
Yeah.
just just take a gander at it and go, huh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
And it was written in 1837.
mhm.
And again, some of Poe's poems, he does, he edits, or he edited several of his works, over and over again. There's different variations sometimes that you will find, but with this one and some of his other ones, the title does change because, like in 1837, it was originally called Ballad, and then, but it's now referred to as Bridal Ballad, which kind of makes sense because of what the poem is about.
Yes, and it even has that some of it, they made mention that the readers of this poem should also refer to Poe's earlier song. So he actually had it attributed to just a song.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about how ballads are usually put to music.
Yeah.
So,
And I would love, because we've heard Annabelle Lee done by Stevie Nicks. I think it
mhm.
would be amazing to hear Bridal Ballad and Ulalume put to music and sung.
Yeah, that would be nice. I
That would
mean, we
be,
have what is it? The Murders at the Rue Morgue was done by a heavy metal band.
yeah, Iron Maiden. And we're not going to talk about too much of music with this,
Mhm.
of Poe's works, because we are going to do an episode for pop culture based on music inspired by Poe's works. And so
Oh yeah, but
don't give
it was
too
just
much
a
away, Jeannie.
no, just doing some tie-ins, knowing that ballads can also be swayed into modern times as
I
music
know.
now. So,
Oh, I know. I know. So,
yeah.
yes, and so and this is why we wanted to talk about ballads, even though, of all the poems that Poe wrote, he really has three that are true ballads. But
Mhm.
again, it's another part of writing that Poe put his hand to.
Right. And if you think about it, any of us that are writers, whether we write short stories or those of us who like to stick mostly with poetry,
Hmm.
we like to write in that type of um aspect of passing on things that we are experiencing
Yeah,
or we're
absolutely.
thinking about in our stories, and we're telling stories in these poems. And but to me, in some instance, it's not, it doesn't have to be a necessity of the length, but
Hmm.
to me, in today's society, the ballads are longer than just a quatrain.
Oh, yeah, I think
Yeah,
so too. Yeah.
and that's the difference, in my opinion, between the times of the early 1800s and the late 1700s, with
Hmm.
that change into now with modern times. Ballads fit with more, it's like a whole story
Yeah,
in
from
length.
beginning to end. And I
Mhm.
was going to say, and moving past Poe's time, going into kind of the early 20th century, 1902, by Wallace Saunders and Eddie Newton, was Casey Jones.
Mhm.
The Ballad of Casey Jones was written.
Yeah,
And
and that mixed with both the tragedy and heroics at the same time
right, because I
for
think,
that
Jeannie, isn't there
story.
some history behind that one, like like true history?
Yes, it's based on a true story on a man named Casey Jones who was a conductor on
Mm-hmm.
the railroad, and he had an accident on April the 30th in 1900,
Okay.
where um he kept he was the only one that died in
Okay.
the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of unfortunate that he did die, but he kind of sacrificed himself in that. And I'm going to try, hang on, I'm going to get I had it up, but it went away. So um, Yeah, he was born in Missouri, but
Hmm.
this happened in Vaughn, Mississippi. He
Okay.
was killed when his passenger train collided with a stalled freight train in, Vaughn, Mississippi, and he
Okay.
managed to uh, make it to where he was the only one that was killed. So
Okay.
he,
He was a
and it's a true ballad,
hero. Yeah, true hero. Yes.
made him a folk hero, basically, in how this happened. And the town was pronounced Casey, which provided his nickname.
Gotcha. Okay, that's
You know,
interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
he was in it, and when he was in his teens, his family moved to the Mississippi River around Casey, Kentucky, and that's
Hmm.
how he got his nickname.
Okay.
So they were kind of running late, so he was trying to make up time, and the fireman on his locomotive warned him of a train ahead, and he told them to jump, but he stayed and held on to the brake and managed to not kill anybody else, but he was the one that died because he sacrificed himself.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
that's how they wrote the ballad, transferring it, because we had the transcontinental railroad that came in the late 1870s. It was
Hmm.
finished, and so railroads were very popular, especially in the north and the south, and across the west it was a whole lot quicker to travel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a true tragic, heroic ballad that was written about Casey Jones.
That's really fascinating, and some ballads today do take the real stories of people
Mm-hmm.
and create songs out of them, and
Yeah.
it's really just that's really cool to think about.
Yeah, and especially like we were talking about the early 1900s, we had like Casey Jones, and then we also have like the industrial age where they wrote a ballad about John Henry, where
Yes.
he was a nail driving man. He was worked on the railroads. He was an African American, worked on the railroads, but then with the invention of this steam, what did they call it? Not a steam engine, but it had a steam engine, but it was a pole driver
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And in the story, in the ballad, John Henry, they pitted John Henry against this, and he killed himself, but he ended up beating the machine. So it had its moral, but in the end, it had its tragedy.
Yeah.
But and then you go, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. Well, I was going to say I was going to move on to the next one we were going to briefly talk about.
Mm-hmm.
In 19, let's see, the next one that we were going to discuss was one of my favorites, The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service,
Mm-hmm.
which he wrote in 1907. Now, I don't believe that there is a song version of this poem, but the poem is just it's so good. It's eerie, it's creepy, it is just it's very Poe-esque.
Oh yeah, it fits the. Oh, actually, there is a song
Okay.
called "The Formation of Sam McGee" and done, and I knew I'd heard it because it's done by one of my favorites, Johnny Cash.
Ah, okay.
Yes, Johnny
Okay.
Cash. He did the song Sam McGee. Um, and it seems like there's been one from a band camp basically, that was recorded in 2022.
Oh,
So
interesting. I'll have to check that out. Well, I'm going to
yeah.
read just the first stanza of this one, and I had the pleasure of teaching this, incorporated into a writing an essay lesson. Basically, this was one of the passages that was used, but we got to read this aloud. But here's the first stanza. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge. I cremated Sam McGee.
Yeah, because
It's
that's
so
talking about
good.
the gold rush, yeah, and
In
how so many,
Alaska. Yeah,
yeah, so many men and had died, and no, most people. Here's the funny part: in 1849, you had the gold rush in California. That's how
right.
I always remember when California became a state was 1849.
Right.
Uh, yeah, and the San Francisco 49ers are named after the gold rush people of 1849.
Right,
But
exactly.
in 1949 was when the Alaskan gold rush
Mhm.
happened. So it's kind
Right.
of funny that way.
It is. And what also ties into Poe, Poe died in 1849 and then the
Hmm.
Alaskan gold rush was 100 years later.
Yep. And also, not only did Johnny Cash do a version of the cremation of Sam McGee, but good old Johnny Horton did. And it's just
Oh,
called McGee.
okay.
So
Okay.
I knew I'd heard those before, and I think I
I
have both of them, but I
I
don't play my CDs much anymore.
yeah, and I think I might have heard the Johnny Cash version before. It's just been
Mhm.
a long, long time ago. And so
Yeah,
but yeah, and it just that's one of my favorites. It's so good and it is so Poe-esque and
mhm,
we are not going to give away if you have not read it, but we highly recommend you go check that out.
exactly.
And
And
then yeah, go ahead, Jeannie.
no, I was just going to say, and that definitely leads us into how the ballad became a folk tradition and the
Hmm.
folk song explosion in the 60s happened because you got John Denver. I'm sorry,
Yes.
John Denver is the favorite, country road, take me home.
Yeah.
I mean that's like the perfect ballad of John, John Denver. He done
Hmm.
it, and then most people don't realize this, but Elton John, when he first opened in America, was at a folk musician area. I don't want to say bar, but it was like a venue. Let's just call it a venue. It was a folk
Okay.
venue that
Okay.
Elton John opened for when he came to America, and that's kind of like where he started getting his big. But I don't ever match folk with Elton John, but it's kind of
No.
interesting. That was the only people that were going to give him a chance here in America.
Yeah, but I will say goodbye, Norma Jean and or Candle in what is it? Candle in the Wind.
Candle
Yeah.
in the Wind, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Yeah,
Yeah, I would definitely put that in the ballad category.
yeah. I would say more of ballads, but folk, because it wasn't a lot of folklore type of thing,
No, no,
but
I
it was
yeah,
definitely balladeer type.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
w- I would I would categorize him as a balladeer.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And and kind of like what you said, Jeannie, with bringing up into the 60s and the 70s with the folk music and also the idea of the American cowboy as well.
Mhm.
We were going to also talk about Streets of
Outlaws.
Laredo by the poem was written in 1910 by John Lomax, but was recorded by Marty Robbins. I think it was the 50s or 60s. I'll have to look up that
Pretty
date.
sure it's the 50s. I
I
actually have the CD, but I don't want to get up and get it.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Let's see, because I have it pulled up, but I don't know if it actually has the date on what
The release.
yeah, and but it basically is based on Laredo located in southern Texas and
Hmm.
just some cowboys there. Um
Yeah, and Marty Robbins, that was definitely his genre of music, was the
oh,
ballads of the cowboys.
absolutely El Paso and
Mhm.
Just I can't think of some of the other ones. There, he actually has a song called "Tonight, Carmen," and that's the song I was named after. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But
That's
and,
cool.
and this one is a true ballad in the sense of the quatrain with the A B C B. And here's the first stanza. As I walked out in the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, I spied a dear cowboy wrapped up in white linen and cold as the clay.
Mhm. Yep, and it was actually, Marty Robbins kind of made it famous when he sang it circa 1963. He
Thank you for
actually
the date.
did,
Yeah.
yeah, he actually did a duet version with Johnny Cash on the
Mhm.
streets of Laredo, and it's also known as the Cowboy's Lament, which it's been recorded many, many, many times. But it's also got its roots, and this is what I thought was fun about this to tie in its roots in the broadside ballads that circulated in England in like the 19th century.
Mhm.
So it's got all that kind of mixed in there. But the Streets of Laredo, the Cowboys Lament, was written, trying to find the actual who actually wrote it before it became popularized as a song, was like Frank H. Maynard. He
Okay.
he was an actual cowboy in Colorado, and he claimed authorship of the self-published song in 1911 called "The Dying Cowboy."
Yeah, and I was going to add in too with what this is tying into what you're saying. This particular website that I found, it's balladofamerica.org.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about that there are over 100 different versions of this particular ballad, which originated from it evolved from a song in the 17th century it was a British ballad about a
Mm-hmm.
soldier who died of syphilis.
Yeah, I saw that also. That's why
Hmm.
when I was saying how it tied into like the European broadside ballads
Yeah, yeah.
because of that. So, but it fits very well as that time period in the old west, in the early
Hmm.
in the late 1800s, when open range during manifest destiny and all the homesteaders coming across, you had the cowboys, you had the murderers, the outlaws, because it was like martial law everywhere
Hmm.
in the west at the time. And you have that cowboy essence of a tragedy and a heroics. And
Yeah.
dime store novels, I would like to bring in. Dime
Yeah.
store novels would actually fit very well in the broadside ballads, because they would tell stories of heroes and uh, tragedies and stuff, but they would embellish a little bit, like most
Oh, yeah.
people
Yeah.
balladeers would do. But
Absolutely.
Jesse James, the Jesse James gang, Billy the Kid, those types, they had their own kind of ballads too. The
Hmm.
OK Corral, the like Tombstone, uh, but also a lot of these ballads kind of spurned literature, books, and stuff like that, because Larry McMurtry, who is a very wide known author in,
Oh, yeah.
I guess we'd call it westerns. We'll call it not
Yeah.
cowboy fiction, but westerns.
Yeah.
He wrote a
Lonesome
book
Dove.
titled, yeah, he
Yeah.
wrote a book titled "The Streets of Laredo."
I saw that as well.
So once more, we now come into the 20th and the 21st century. Um, we now have the crossover to where ballads aren't obsolete per se. They have
Hmm.
just, like, from the very beginning with the epic poems to the ballads and things, they just evolved.
Right. Well, and one of the kind of more even from our generation, date year of your birth, 1973,
Mhm.
what kind of sparked the whole 80s phenomenon of ballads is Styx's song Lady.
Yep.
some of the research I did, it was like the catalyst that really morphed a lot of these, especially rock bands, but also pop artists and everybody else during the 80s, even like we said, Dolly Parton with Jolene. I guess that was
Hmm.
70s. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, talk about 70s and 80s, what we know of like the ballad like that was done over and over and over. And some other research that I found was that polling people, of varying ages and, everywhere, of, what is probably the best song, a ballad of a song that was ever done. And the number one that I found on multiple websites was Stairway to Heaven.
Oh, yes. I mean, even now, it's been connecting to, Dolly Parton. You talk about Jolene, but Dolly Parton did a version of Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's been redone and done. And it was, okay, let me get it right. It was Leonard Skinner, right? Or
Yes, I
Led
believe.
Zeppelin. Okay. Leonard
Yeah.
Skinner was the release, but it was written, um, was it written by Bob Dylan?
I'm double checking us. Yeah, Led
Yeah, double.
Zeppelin did Stairway to Heaven.
Okay, so it was Led Zeppelin, not Leonard Skinner.
Yes.
I knew there was Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, but was written, if I'm not mistaken, by either Bob Dylan or who was the other one?
Let's see.
Oh,
Okay, it was
oh,
released. It was released in 1971,
uh-huh.
and let's see. Composed by Jimmy Page and
Yes.
lyrics written by lead singer Robert Plant. So
Okay, yeah.
the actual band members of Led Zeppelin wrote it. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
sometimes will confuse the same way, Jeannie, with Leonard Skinner and Led Zeppelin
Led
because of the
Zeppelin.
L's. The L's.
Oh, and the reason I think I got it mixed up because my guitar weeps was written by Bob Dylan, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Okay.
Because a lot of those, like Leonard Skinner and Led Zeppelin, and a lot of those bigger band members that were, coming into play in the 70s, they
Mm-hmm.
would they would record these types of ballads, and
Yeah.
made them more famous. And but a lot of the times the lyrics were written by lesser known musicians, I guess I want to say. It's not
Yeah.
that they're, not like they're lesser, but just lesser known.
Right. Right.
Because it
Well,
shocked me the first time that I found out that Patsy Cline's big hit "Crazy" was written by Willie Nelson, and I'm going,
yes.
"What?"
Well, and another one, is um, and this person did a recording of the song that I'm about to tell, but his version is not as famous as Jimi Hendrix, who recorded All Along the Watchtower. But
Mm-hmm.
Bob Dylan wrote the song and Bob Dylan recorded it, but Jimi Hendrix was the one that is known amongst everyone.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of the knocking on heaven's door. That's why I got it mixed up with Stairway to Heaven. I
Okay.
always get those. Bob Dylan wrote that one.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, a lot of the songs that big bands have made popular were written by other artists that are,
Right.
uh, that are popular but not as known. And Bob Dylan actually wrote a 1965 Ballad of a Thin Man. I don't think I've
Interesting.
ever heard that one, but okay.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, thinking, okay, why? Who's the other one besides Bob Dylan that I always get them mixed up? Bob Dylan and
I'm not
the other
sure.
writer, the other big writer.
There's a lot.
I know, but it's like Bob Dylan, and they were popular at the same time.
Simon and
I'm gonna drive
Garfunkel?
myself crazy.
Simon and
No,
Garfunkel?
Oh, okay, just go on. It'll pop up on
Yeah, I was gonna
in a
say,
minute.
yeah, we'll have to come back because we can't
Yeah, yeah.
name
You just
names and
yeah.
but
You just yeah. I'll figure it out. We'll move on though.
oh yeah. But and now kind of you already kind of alluded to this that ballads are still done, but the the tipping point of ballads was in the 1980s, and
Hmm.
it's lost a whole lot of steam since then, especially for music and ballads, not necessarily poetry. But I think even there you don't see a lot of ballads written just as poems either anymore.
Right, because they've kind of crossed into they're melded together per se,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's not a bad thing because things have to be have to adapt,
yeah.
and it's not a bad thing. You just have to just either like it or not. I hate to say it, but
Hmm. But
it,
the cool thing is that we have all these ballads that have been put to music that over many years, especially over the last 100 years, really, and we still have them to cherish and play and listen and just keep on keeping on with paying homage to something that has made a huge impact in poetry and music.
absolutely. I mean, you cannot forget about tragedy or comedy or heroism or anything,
Mhm.
but you have to be you have to be able to pass on those types of stories in a way
Mhm.
that the people nowadays will remember, so
Yeah. And maybe to keep modern history alive, maybe we should go back to writing ballads.
yeah, I don't see why we shouldn't, because it's um definitely something that needs to still be around. I
Yeah.
mean, we can adapt it somewhat, but it still needs to be done.
Yeah.
And because it is, it's meant to pass along
Yeah.
stories and history and stuff. And I think we definitely need it.
I totally agree. And what is very cool about ballads is that Poe had a hand, and even though it was only a few of his poems that were in the form of a ballad, but he had a part, and there's well, you wonder who was inspired by Poe's ballads to write their own.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be some inspiration somewhere. And
Hmm.
Poe has inspired so many other things. Why not inspire ballads?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think I think it is what can I say? It's an art form that's still around, but not given as much accolade as it should.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm going to say too is because of the astounding man that Poe was with his works, I challenge someone to write a ballad about Poe. And
Oh,
maybe
that would be good.
even for the Poet Like Poe poetry contest.
Exactly. That's going on right now.
Yes, you have until May 15th to submit your poem. Go to our website, sixdegreesofpoe.com. Click on the 2024 Poe-it Like Poe Poetry Contest tab. And
Mhm.
right underneath the title, it says Submit Your Poem. And we have guidelines for how to write it. We have prizes. And if you have any questions at all, please email us at 6degreesofpoe@gmail.com.
Exactly. Or 6 degrees of Poe at no Potastic 2 at 6 degrees of Poe.com, isn't it?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
but Gmail probably would be easier to remember.
Yes.
Oh, and
That's why I used that one.
I remembered it's Eric Clapton. That's the
Ah,
other one I couldn't think of.
yes. Yes.
Always
He's
get Eric
amazing.
Clapton and Bob Dylan, and because Eric Clapton, he was an awesome. Well, I think he still is. Is he still alive?
Yes.
I think.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think,
Uh,
yes.
yeah. So he's an awesome writer, songwriter, and stuff too. So,
Yeah.
but
He,
anyway, so yeah, I had to throw that out there. I remembered now. Like Leonard Skinner and Led Zeppelin, I always get Bob Dylan and I just forgot his name again. Eric Clapton mixed up. It's though they're so easy to, kind of, well, in my mind anyway. So, but
yes.
yeah,
And
poetry contest is going on till May 15th. Did we say that
yes.
already?
Yes, but it doesn't hurt
Okay.
to say it again. And um, I just looked up Eric Clapton to make sure. I'm pretty sure he is still alive. He was born in 1945. It does not have a death
Yeah.
date. So yeah, he is
Okay.
still
Yeah. So he
around.
and yeah, he and Bob Dylan are still around. So yeah. I didn't think they
So
were old, but I couldn't remember if they were still here.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, they are probably about the same age.
Hmm.
Yes. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely check out our poetry contest. And we are slowly but surely releasing videos of our poetry reading event that launched our poetry contest. The first one is out on YouTube today, and it was our first guest for the poetry reading event, Polly Knightley, and she is reading alone. And we're going to share that out on social media a little bit later.
Yeah. And
And
just
we'll
to
be
give you
sharing.
some inspiration to,
Yes.
throw in and we love to have you join us for our poetry contest. So,
Absolutely. And we've got some fantastic judges just
mhm.
waiting for May 15th to get here so they can start reading the poems from our submitters in an anonymous fashion.
Yes, that definitely want to know that. And another thing is that the Potastic 2, Carmen and I are not judges.
Nope. Nope.
We only collect the wonderful poems and pass it on to our 9 judges,
Yes,
ask them to make the decision. The only time we would step in is if there was some kind of tie
that's
or
right.
known. So yeah,
Yeah.
please just
But
you
most
know
likely we'll put if there is a tie, we will put those back to the judges and let them make the final decisions. And just
yeah.
one other thing too, it is free to enter. There is no
Hmm.
fee to do this. It is a free contest, so
Yes,
open to
and
everybody, adult, 18 and over. Youth category is age 11 to 17.
yeah, and we ask that you not submit something that may be known by others, like you've already published it or something. We definitely want original work, no AI
Right.
at all, but
Mhm.
we would like something that our judges would not be able to recognize, so we can keep it more uh,
Fresh.
unbiased, I guess is
Fresh.
what
Yes, and
yeah,
unbiased. Yes.
yeah. So just
All
keep those in
right.
mind, please. And
Yes.
so
I
we
think,
thank you. Yeah, I think
yes.
that's it.
Yeah. So I guess, Jeanie,
We are
we are
Poe
Poe
out.
out.
Would God I could awaken, for I dream I know not how, and my soul is sorely shaken, lest an evil step be taken, and the dead who is forsaken may not be happy now.